Dear students, now we are going to begin the semester with W.B. Yeats' Easter 1916. Now, Easter 1916 is one of those poems of W.B. Yeats which relate to the contemporary themes. This poem was written on September 25, 1916 and appeared in the volume entitled Michael Robarts and the Dancer. The theme of this poem is Dublin Uprising of 1916. At that time, the Irish people stood up in rebellion against the British for independence. Naturally, this uprising was crushed by British army and people were executed in large number. Their leaders were arrested and put to death. Now, when I am telling all these things and you are listening, at that time there is a possibility that you remember our own freedom struggle of 1947, when India stood against Britishers, and at that time many people, many patriotics, rebellions, they were crushed down by Britishers. Likewise, these Dublin people, they stood against Britishers for independence. Now the event impressed W.B. Yeats very much. Now it is very important to see in what way W.B. Yeats looks at that event of rebellion of Easter 1916. Now he was naturally deeply moved by the heroism and martyrdom of the rebellions. At the very outset, at the very beginning, he had little sympathy with their political methods and the revolution they were going through. But while writing this poem, we see the poet's true insight, and the whole Irish scene was transformed with the perspective of Yeats here. Now, as he looks at this event, and as I told you that he was very much impressed by the martyrdom and the events those took place at that time. Now, while writing this poem, here Yeats compares the days before rebellion, revolution, and the days after revolution. Now, W.B. Yeats was very much well acquainted with the people, those who took part in this revolution and those who were called as heroes and martyrs. Now, this Easter Rising of 1916 could not be seen as an isolated incident, but as a part of history. Actually, Yeats was not at all in the favor of the bloodshed that was going on there. He definitely believed that though that bloodshed was unwise, but as a true patriot, he himself cannot resist to portray that rebellion, that heroism and martyrdom in his own words through this poem, through this very beautiful poem. Now let me tell you something in Marathi as well, की जेव्हा आपण ही ईस्टर 1916 ही कविता वाचतो किंवा अभ्यासतो, त्यावेळेस निश्चित आपल्या डोळ्यासमोर भारतीय स्वातंत्र्य लढ्याचा जो इतिहास आहे आणि त्या काळामध्ये जसं भारतीयांनी आपलं रक्त सांडलं, जसं भारतीयांनी आपलं हौतात्म्य दिलं, त्याच पद्धतीने आयर्लंडचे लोक हे ब्रिटिशांच्या विरोधात उभे ठाकलेले आपल्याला दिसून येतात. आता या कवितेमध्ये इट्स अगदी सुरुवातीला जर आपण बघितलं तर तो थोडासा काय म्हणता येईल त्याला, क्रिटिकल किंवा तो जो रक्तपात त्यावेळेस त्यांनी बघितलेला होता तो काही त्याला शहाणपणाचा वाटलेला नव्हता. निश्चित अगदी सुरुवातीला त्यांनी त्या सगळ्या रिबेलियनवरती, क्रांतीवरती टीका केलेली आपल्याला दिसून येते. पण तो स्वतः एक आयरिशमन आहे आणि जेव्हा त्याच्या देशबांधवांचं रक्त तिथं सांडलं गेलं, त्याचे देशबांधव जेव्हा पकडले गेले, डांबून ठेवल्या गेलं, मृत्यूची शिक्षा त्यांना दिली गेली, त्यावेळेस तो या सगळ्या प्रकारापासून स्वतःला अलिप्त ठेवू शकला नाही आणि त्या सगळ्याचं वर्णन त्यांनी आपल्याला या कवितेमध्ये केलेलं दिसून येतं. आता आपण थोडंसं लाईन बाय लाईन स्टॅन्झा वाईज ही कविता बघूया. नाव विल सी द फर्स्ट स्टॅन्झा फर्स्ट. ही सेज, I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among grey 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite meaningless words, and thought before I had done. In this first stanza, the poet here draws the picture of the people of Ireland before Easter Rebellion of 1916. That how Irish life, Irish people were leading their life casually, normally, as they used to lead, which was full of fun and frivolity. Now, the poet remembers here how he used to meet people coming out of shops, offices among the 18th century old houses, and the poet used to greet them with nod of his head, with words of mere formality or meaningless words, just good morning, good evening, and like that. Now he also used to narrate, to entertain his companions at the clubs, some ridiculous chit-chat among the people, and he was certain that all of them were living a life of mixed colors, of a mocking tale or a gibe to please a companion around the fire at the club. Now being certain that they and I but lived where motley is a worn, all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. Now, as he was certain that all the people they were living or leading a life of mixed colors, like a dress of a jester. But at the end of the stanza, we see that suddenly the picture changes, and suddenly whatever that was glorious and beautiful, that turns into a terrible beauty. या पहिल्या स्टॅन्झामध्ये आपल्याला कवी कशाचं वर्णन सांगतो आहे तर ईस्टर 1916च्या आधीचं जे काही आयरिश लोकांचं आयुष्य आहे त्याच्याबद्दल, की कशा पद्धतीने एक सर्वसामान्य आयुष्य तिथं चालू आहे, रंगीबेरंगी आयुष्य. नंतरच्या काही लाईन्समध्ये आपल्याला असं दिसून येतं दॅट दे वर लीडिंग अ लाईफ ऑफ मिक्स्ड कलर्स लाईक अ ड्रेस ऑफ अ जेस्टर, की एखाद्या विदूषकाचा पोशाख जसा रंगीबेरंगी असतो तशाच पद्धतीने कलरफुल असं हे आयरिश लोकांचं आयुष्य होतं, जरी ते ब्रिटिशाच्या अंमलाखाली असले तरी देखील. He remembers how he used to meet people, greet people, how they used to exchange some of very meaningless words, की कशा पद्धतीने लोकांशी ऑफिसेसच्या बाहेर पडत असताना, 18व्या शतकातल्या त्या घरांच्या बाहेर पडत असताना, क्लबमधून बाहेर पडत असताना कशा पद्धतीने एकमेकांशी त्यांचा संवाद तिथं होत होता, त्याचं वर्णन त्यांनी या पॅराग्राफमध्ये आपल्याला केलेलं दिसून येतं. आणि त्या वर्णनावरून आपल्याला कल्पना येऊ शकते की कशा पद्धतीने आयरिश लोकांचं आयुष्य हे रिबेलियन या क्रांतीच्या सुरुवाती आधी होतं. आणि सडनली नाव ही सेज दॅट बीइंग सर्टन दॅट दे अँड आय बट लिव्ड वेअर मोटले इज वॉर्न ऑल चेंज्ड changed utterly. But as soon as the revolution took place, everything changed suddenly and utterly. अकस्मात आणि संपूर्णरित्या कसं आयुष्य हे बदलून गेलं किंवा त्याच्यामध्ये फरक पडत गेला हे कवी इथं आपल्याला सांगतो आहे. अ टेरिबल ब्युटी इज बॉर्न अँड ही सेज ॲज सडनली एव्हरीथिंग चेंज्ड अँड हाव इट चेंज्ड, इट वॉज चेंज्ड gloriously. It was a glorious life and it became a very terrible. It became a terrible beauty. Now in the next stanza, which is quite a big one, I have divided here this stanza into 2 slides, right? So try to understand this. Now in these 2 slides I have divided this second stanza. Now in the second stanza he says, the poet says, the lines are like this, that women's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers? When young and beautiful, she wrote to harriers. This man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. This author, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. Now in this Dublin Rebellion 1916, there is a reference here. It gives us that women's days. Now the women referred here was a Countess Marquis, who was once very beautiful, but now she was passing her time in ignorant goodwill, pleasant conversation. She was a famous politician who took part in this Irish rebellion of 1916, and actually she was sentenced to death, but later on she was released and she lived a life of a member of parliamentarian. Now this woman, or it gives the reference of that woman here. Now this once beautiful woman named Marquis grown shrewd, and her voice grew shrewd because of her constant arguments, because of her constant speaking. Her voice grew shrill, became sharp and shrewd. This lady, who was once very beautiful, being afterwards a politician, how she spent her days in arguments, in speaking, talking about in favor of the rebellion for these Irish people, and how her voice also changed due to her constant talks, how her voice grew shrill here. Now there is one more reference of this man who was the schoolmaster called Pierce. This man, then his helper and friend Connolly, who took an active part in the rebellion. All these people, Yeats personally knew them. Yeats was personally acquainted to them, and how these people, they changed tremendously and suddenly. The beautiful woman named Marquis, a schoolmaster Pierce, and his friend Connolly, they played their individual roles and fought with a unified aim of winning freedom for their country. Now this Countess Marquis' participation in this rebellion, it turned her from a very beautiful to a very busy, shrewd talker who now passes her time constantly talking in favor of the rebellion. Now this Pierce, who was a schoolmaster, school teacher, who kept a school and was fond of riding horses. One of his friend called Cannoli was really a rising star, and even Yeats saw a kind of promise in that person and felt that he might have won fame in the end. Now, all these sensitive and daring people, they changed suddenly. Because of this revolution, they fought for one unified aim of freedom from Britishers. Now, this man had kept a school and rode our winged horse. This other, the Connolly, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end. Means Yeats also felt that there is certain kind of charm, there is certain kind of spark in that person, and he might have won fame in the end. He was very sensitive and was daring, and his thoughts were good enough. Now all these people, they changed. So sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. All these people, they changed. की एकेकाळी खूप वेगळी वाटणारी, वेगळ्या स्वभावाची भासणारी ही जी माणसं आहेत, ती माणसं ह्या रेव्होल्यूशनच्या नंतर क्षणार्धात त्याला असं कळतं की यांच्यामध्ये खूप बदल झालेला आहे, की हे खूप बदललेले आहेत. पण हे जरी बदललेले असले तरी एक विशिष्ट असं एकत्रित असं ध्येय ह्या लोकांचं आहे आणि त्याच्यासाठी ते लढत आहेत. नाव दिस अदर मॅन आय हॅड ड्रीम्ड. नाव देर इज अ रेफरन्स हिअर ऑफ वन मोर पर्सन. त्याचा उल्लेख इथं इट्स असा करतो, दिस अदर मॅन. नाव हू इज दिस अदर मॅन? दिस अदर मॅन I had dreamed a drunken, vainglorious lout. There is a reference of John McBride. या व्यक्तीचं नाव जॉन मॅकब्राईड आहे, who is Yeats' successful rival in love. If we see the biography of W.B. Yeats, at that time you come to know that Yeats fell in love with one girl or one woman called Maud. की ह्या मॉडगॉनच्या प्रेमामध्ये इट्स खूप वर्षे राहिलेला होता. सो मेनी टाइम्स ही प्रपोज्ड हर, बट शी रिजेक्टेड हिज प्रपोजल अँड शी मॅरिड दिस जॉन मॅकब्राईड. की ह्या मॉडगॉनवरती त्याचं खूप प्रेम होतं, पण तिने त्याचं प्रेम नाकारलं आणि या जॉन मॅकब्राईड, अर्थात नंतर जॉन मॅकब्राईड आणि मॉडगॉनचा डिवोर्स पण झालेला होता. पण हा रायव्हल आहे, प्रतिस्पर्धी असं इट्स मानतो त्याला त्याच्या प्रेमामधला. सो दिस फेमस ऑकवर्ड प्राऊड जॉन मॅकब्राईड, ही ऑल्सो चेंज. की त्याच्या बाबतीत काय वाटत होतं याला, हू इज अ ड्रंकन वेनग्लोरियस लाऊड. ही हॅड डन मोस्ट बिटर रॉंग. की ज्यांनी इट्सला पर्सनली खूप वाईट गोष्ट केलेली आहे, की त्यांनी त्याच्या प्रेयसीशी लग्न केलेलं आहे. येट आय नंबर हिम इन द सॉन्ग. पण तो म्हणतो की मी त्याला वगळू शकत नाही. येट आय नंबर हिम इन द सॉन्ग. ही टू हॅज रिझाइन्ड हिज पार्ट इन द कॅज्युअल कॉमेडी. ही टू हॅज बीन चेंज्ड इन हिज टर्न, ट्रान्सफॉर्म्ड utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Now, this person whom Yeats had once regarded as a drunken, vainglorious and awkward, proud person, about whom he felt like a comic character or a fool, now Yeats feel that this person also changed suddenly. He too got suddenly changed in the rebellion, and he came to be regarded as a hero whom he cannot exclude. की ज्याला तो वगळू शकत नाही, ज्याचा उल्लेख केल्याशिवाय इट्सला पर्याय नाही. इतक्या पद्धतीने त्या व्यक्तीमध्ये सुद्धा बदल झालेला इट्स मान्य करतो. इट वॉज अ मिरॅकल ॲट दॅट टाईम. सी, all these people, they were fighting for their motherland, fighting with a collective aim, fighting with something good for their own motherland, for their own people. They do not hesitate to shed their blood. They do not hesitate even to meet death in the form of martyrdom. की ह्या हौतात्म्य पत्करायला सुद्धा हे लोक मागे पुढे बघत नव्हते. अशा पद्धतीने त्यांनी या आयरिश स्वातंत्र्य लढ्यामध्ये भाग घेतलेला होता. अँड इट्स रिअली फील्स हिअर दॅट इट वॉज अ मिरॅकल दॅट पॅट्रिऑटिक सेल्फ सॅक्रिफाईस वूड वर्क. जसं मी सुरुवातीला तुम्हाला सांगितलेलं होतं इंट्रोडक्शनमध्ये की ॲक्च्युअली इन द व्हेरी बिगिनिंग it's had little sympathy with all these people, with their political methods, with their way of fighting against Britishers. But with a true poet's insight, he saw, or he now sees, that the whole Irish scene transformed by the tragic incidents, by the tragic execution, by the tragic death of these known and many of the unknown patriotics of Ireland. And now he says, he describes here how the miracle takes place because of the patriotic feelings and how the result became, or how the result turned out to be a terrible beauty. आणि कशा पद्धतीने हा रिझल्ट हा एक वेगळं सौंदर्य त्याला दिसलं ह्या सगळ्या स्वातंत्र्य लढ्याच्या माध्यमातून, या सगळ्या देशभक्तांच्या लढ्याच्या माध्यमातून ते त्यांनी आपल्याला या 2 स्टँजामध्ये सांगितलेलं दिसून येतं. नाव आय थिंक वी शुड स्टॉप हिअर. नाव रिमेनिंग पार्ट ऑफ द पोएम विल continue in our next lecture. So till then we'll stop here.